Just a little bit about myself. My name's Henry Linsky. I'm the President of the Society of Dyers and Colourists in the Australian and New Zealand region. The SDC is a technical body that's been around for about 80 years. We've been established to promote coloration, training, education, and that's the theme of most of our conferences, are really about education and coloration, and also innovation and local trends. And when I talk about innovation, we've got a fantastic speaker this afternoon with Lee Wainwright coming from the States, and I think it's going to be most exciting. I'm highly looking forward to it. Mac Ferguson has been very diligent in putting together a most extensive program today of overseas and local speakers. I hope it's going to be informative, and I'll hand over to Mac for the first introduction.
Morning, everybody.
Morning, Mac.
Morning, Mac. It's my pleasure to introduce the Honourable David O'Brien, MLC, the member for the Western Victoria. I've known David for about 14 years, I think now, roughly, ever since my daughter got married, because David's wife and my daughter were students together at RMIT. David is a very keen advocate for manufacturing and rural industries and developing businesses in regional Victoria. And we're very lucky to have him to open our conference today, David O'Brien.
Thank you very much, Mac. I do appreciate that overly generous welcome, and it has been a great privilege knowing you, and also being able to appear at now my second Society of Dyers and Colourists conference at RMIT, and also thank President Henry for hosting us, and all the other speakers. I think we have a fantastic program that is being put together, and it's an important industry. And the theme of my talk is that we perhaps need to occasionally be unashamedly proud of our industries and prepared in international discussions to fight for their continued preservation. Just as a quick aside, I note that I think you said the car parking was originally at $4 and at $7. I wish I had one of those electronic poker machine purchases so I could have bought them at $4 and sold them at $7, but they continue to go up. I'm also, there's been a bit of discussion about Victorian politics this week. I'm a member of the National Party in the Upper House, and my electorate is very large. It goes from Geelong and Ballarat right through to Portland and Warrnambool, and therefore contains much of our regional manufacturing, certainly around Geelong and Ballarat, but also our food and fibre producers, be they from wool to industrial hemp to other producers as well. And it's an important part of the electorate. But I've also recently had the the family honour of having O'Briens now represent the National Party from the South Australian border to Gippsland, because my colleague Danny O'Brien now represents the National Party in the Upper House in the Eastern Victoria province. And there's been a bit of talk about balance of power, and some suggesting that the independent member Jeff Shaw controls the balance of power, but in fact it's the O'Brien faction who control the balance of power in both houses. You need 2 votes in the upper house, and we have them, and of course you need 1 vote in the lower house, and we have the Treasurer, Michael O'Brien, as a very prominent and capable member of our faction. So I'll leave the political asides there, but I would also add that my time as an MP hasn't just been as a member of the government. I think one of the important roles as an MP that I've enjoyed, I'm sure other MPs have as well, is often not as focused on in the media, but is the role as a parliamentarian where you can serve particularly on parliamentary committees, cross-party parliamentary committees. And so we know we're going to have an election at least by 29 November, and I'm sure in years to come my time on the parliamentary committees will be something, if I am not re-elected, which is always a possibility, that I will hold in great pride and memory. One of the committees I was on was the Family and Community Development Committee, which looked at the child abuse issue, which was a very interesting issue and an important issue for the Parliament to do good bipartisan work, and I believe we did that. And more recently and relevantly to this meeting, I have recently been appointed the chair of the Rural and Regional Committee of the Victorian Parliament. So we have members from the National Party, the Liberal Party and the Labor Party on that committee. And we are currently holding an inquiry into boosting Victorian regional exports, which is why I raise it to your attention. We are still open for submissions, and we've in fact received a very serious follower of submissions here, including from wool growers and textile producers and others interested in your industry. And it has been a very helpful exercise for me in formulating some views I've had as a MP about where we are heading as a country in our trade and regulatory regime, particularly relevant to your textiles and clothing industry. And so that's the theme of my brief opening presentation, will be about these questions of competition, trade policy, tax policy and regulatory policy, which have in a sense, in the main, received a tripartisan consensus amongst the Liberal, Labor and National parties really since the 1980s, but used to, in fact, 100 years ago, occupy much of the ground of debate, and have in recent times began to resurface into the debate, and I suspect will be, from a political point of view, certainly at a federal level, but also at a state level, some of the most important questions we will debate, because they very much affect the future of your opportunities to increase exports, but also dealing with imports. And the one thing that is absolutely clear is that we are now in an information age, so that the days where you and your competitors do not know what is happening in other countries, do not have the opportunity for import substitution, and the corresponding challenges that poses on all our manufacturers in terms of profit margins, in terms of know-how, in terms of their commercial advantage, their opportunities, their reputation, has never been more apparent. So in pure economic theory, which is based upon a market of full information, in a sense we are heading more towards that in a factual sense, and that is part of the context of which I will make the submission to you. But first, because it's a start, I'd just like a quick exercise in some recognition of some other politicians. Hands up who have heard of Paul Keating? Right. And put them high. Hands, you don't have to support them, just heard of them. Hands up if you've heard of Bob Hawke. Hands up if you've heard of Robert Menzies. Hands up if you've heard of John McEwen. Quite a few. But John McEwen was very much a big part of the Menzies government. He's known as Blackjack. And in the National Party, he remains he's the shortest Prime Minister of 24 days after Harold Holt went missing, but was also, we would say, the greatest Trade Minister and very much responsible for the success of what is often called the Menzies government, and a federal Nationals leader. But it is generally accepted, and I don't necessarily make any dispute with this, that as we headed towards the 1980s, protectionism, or McEwenism as it became to be known as trade policy, particularly in your industry and other manufacturing industries, was regarded as over-protectionary. And we had effectively, when what happened in political terms is Paul Keating and Bob Hawke took the Labor Party into the right, who have traditionally been bastions of industry protection with the Union Association. And when they took the Labor Party into the right, you had effectively political consensus that we should, as a country, head towards a free trade environment and a zero tariff and an open market in many sectors. Now this is a concept that I studied economics, and I don't have any dispute with it as a trade theory. And I should preface this earlier, the views I have here today, whilst I'm a member and a chair of this inquiry and receiving evidence and also a member of the government, they are very much my own views. I also suspect they're not necessarily shared by all views, by all members of the government, but I feel it's my duty to impart them upon you as best I can, given the opportunity I have. But as we've headed towards a free trade regime, and we have taken the decision as a country to move unilaterally and to expose ourselves perhaps prior to obtaining the concessions that may have been obtained in bilateral negotiations, some say, and I would be one of them, that we have in a sense unnecessarily exposed ourselves as a country to the perils of international competition prior to obtaining the benefits of a proper open economy from a world scale. And it's in the comparative regulatory regime that as we move to more bilateral free trade agreements, or now they're termed market access agreements because they don't ever deliver pure free trade, we actually need to think about our direct tax and regulatory and tariff regimes in a much more comparative sense as a country to our import competitors and also our export nations. And I don't know if any of you have ever tried to obtain information on comparative tariff or trade or market access regimes between either our trading competitors, our import substitutes, or any country. It is extremely difficult to actually obtain the information. It's generally contained in WTO schedules, some Wikipedia articles and other sources which aren't necessarily reliable. But it is something where information is scarce. And this is opposed to the very pure information that traders have as to how much something costs in their factory or in their workplace, or a consumer, particularly with the growth of online purchasing, now has the ability to purchase clothes online and avoid all, in a sense, Australian retail, let alone Australian manufacturing, and have it delivered. And we as a country presently don't even put a GST on some of these imports. Notwithstanding that, and this is of great pride to the people here, and to people like Mac and others who have advocated strongly for this industry, it is very pleasing to see that really Australia and Victoria still has a very healthy textile clothing and footwear industry in comparison to perhaps other manufacturing industries. We have recently seen the demise of our local car industry. It presently employs about 1,500 people and generates about 659 million in wages and salaries. It is also an important allied industry, or really part of the same industry, but often segmented from the agriculture and the food exports, which are booming. Food and fibre exports are predicted to double. And it is said that we once rode on the sheep's back, and in many ways we are expected, if there is going to be a tapering off in the mining boom, which may not happen, but even if it doesn't happen, we are expected to feed a growing world, clothe a growing world, and in all the debates about foreign ownership which occur, the point made by the Deputy Prime Minister Warren Truss is, I think, the best point, which is that yes, there's interest in by foreign countries in our land, in our agricultural production, because it's going to be very valuable. It's a capital acquisition. It's going to be the means of production into the future, and whatever price it's at now, it's probably going cheap over the long term. So that is a positive, and that is a foundation, particularly with our reputation, and it is a well-earned reputation, and many of the participants here have been great contributors towards obtaining that reputation. And that's a reputation for clean, green, sustainable production, not just of food, but also of fibre and textiles and food clothing dyes, and indeed our whole sustainable country. Now, one could talk about also climate change, and I put on record, although people would have sometimes stereotypes about National Party MPs, I'm a believer in the weight of evidence, and I'm an evidence-based, as an ex-lawyer, I'm an evidence-based person. None of us know precisely what happens in the world. We have to be guided by the evidence, and if 99% of scientists agree that there's human-induced climate change, well, I'm prepared to go along and do whatever we can to reduce that. But, for example, the remedy of the carbon tax that was imposed, the real problem I had, and I've put this in many speeches, was that it was a tax on Australian industries for a global problem. It was a reverse tariff at precisely the time where our manufacturers and our food dyes and other clothing dyes were in fact in many ways greener and had higher standards than our international competitors. So what it did, and I have a very good example, I also play music, and I had a CD manufacturer, Dex Audio, just in North Melbourne, who are our largest independent manufacturer of CDs, but they also manufacture in China, and many businesses do this. This is the current model. And they have a 6-cent margin on their Victorian CDs, and basically the way it works, if you put in your CD requests ahead of time, you will get them manufactured in China quite cheaply. If you are running late, as many musicians are, as they rush towards a CD launch or something, you'll get them made here at a fair mark above that. But that's how they keep their Victorian manufacturing going. And there's many businesses that operate in that model, and it's in fact a very good model for the country in 2 ways. One, it allows these businesses to survive and have genuine networks into export markets, but also it allows this comparative tax and regulatory regime to be properly assessed. And so basically their point was that it was a tax on our Australian manufacturing arm that did not impose any tax on international arms. So I personally think that Australia has an advantage in environmental standards, and we should be heading towards negotiations for a genuine emissions trading scheme and a carbon market, if that is to be the way to tackle climate change. But we shouldn't, in my view, have led the way in a way that puts such cost pressure on our existing manufacturers. Now, others can have different views, and that's just how I see the argument. And not just carbon taxes, that's merely one example of the many regulatory imposts we generally impose upon our own industries, but we don't seek to impose them on our international competitors. I'm conscious of the time, we started a bit late, and I would also want to get to let you hear from perhaps more technical presenters such as Mr. Clarke, so I won't keep this going as long as I might have been prepared to. One of the issues I'd like to talk about obviously has been the recent documented issue of the azo dyes. Now, the azo, not in getting pronunciation for both, so I went with either. And to me, it was another example of a disparity between our present regulatory environment and what we expect on our imports. And forgive me if I don't have the technical detail. And in a sense, I want to raise these issues for your discussion. I don't propose to have all the answers. I think they're long-term issues. They require a debate really in our community about this and a greater use of information about what is our present tax structure, how is our policies really benefiting our role in the world and leading to a better, freer global economy or not. And the situation with the azo dyes was a good example of that, where, as I understand it, the chemicals that are in those dyes, arguably, again, it's not necessarily conclusive, but they are arguably carcinogenic, and accordingly have been banned in Europe, and they're banned for importation as chemicals into Australia. But if they had been, through import substitution or some other means, found their way into clothing in another country, they can find their way, and did find their way, into a number of products. I won't name the companies, but I have a list of them, and they are many of our largest product retailers. Approximately, I think, 208,000 items were voluntarily recalled, and now the ACCC are looking and are, as I understand it, preparing a report to be handed down in July, which would, in my view, if it was to be sensible and consistent, and that's all I seek. I don't seek advantages for Australian businesses. I just don't think we should disadvantage our own when we have these fundamentally sound processes, in my view. But the ACCC will hand out a report in July as to whether or not they should be banned in imported products as well. And to me, that would be a worthy and consistent reputation thing to do. On the positive, we are seeing many of our manufacturers remain and thrive, and I would like to talk about a couple of examples just in my Geelong area. We have Cotton On, and the government was proud to provide subsidies in the sense of regional growth fund assistance to them. Again, that's an option, and that is an example of market interference. We have taxes, subsidies. I wonder in that context why we wouldn't have tariffs as well, why at least to the point of comparative tariff with another country. For example, China still, whilst we were negotiating a free trade agreement to get agriculture, as I'm informed, has a 38% tariff on wool and has a 40% tariff on cotton. Why wouldn't the best negotiation position, if we're trying to get a free trade agreement for our farmers, be to have an equivalent tariff on their products until we can arrive at a genuine bilateral agreement? That's the question. That's what I'd leave for you and pose. I'm really looking forward to Adrian to talk about industrial hemp, which is another example of a good industry, industrial hemp, that unfortunately has found itself regulatorily restricted in Victoria, but not in overseas countries, and is a huge opportunity. I'm very proud that this government has freed up the production of opium in Victoria for pharmaceuticals. Again, another example of that. And I'm more than happy to receive any requests and submissions and suggestions you have along with this line. So what I would see as another opportunity in closing is for Australia to reassess some of its trade and regulatory environment and basically leave with a simple equation. If we have a regulation, and not all red and green tape is bad, some of it is essential to protect our quality products, and not all of it should be removed. But the question is, should we accept products from other countries that don't have that? Do we need to even up that situation? And secondly, when we've got taxes and tariff comparability, why do we have it on our own but not our overseas countries? So they are the questions that I pose, and I'll leave you with just a recognition that if we are to perhaps look at some of our growth in these industries and indeed lead the world again in clean, green, sustainable production, then I would encourage us to remember a bit of what Black Jack McEwen did, and to quote another great Australian musical export, AC/DC, I'd look forward to us getting back in black on the sheep's back. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, David. I'm sure you've given a lot of people, most of the people here, some food for thought, which is one of the important things. It's now my great pleasure to introduce our first speaker.
15 minutes early, so we'll have an early tea. Yes?
Can I? It's a bit rude, but
No, you're right.
you know we're 15 minutes early. We've got David O'Brien here. I wonder,
Yes.
Mac, if we can ask some questions because David can't be
I
here
thought I
for the
got away
panel
with it.
session.
Got away with
Well,
it.
I don't object to. I'm sure.
If David doesn't, I'm sure.
He's
Great
pretty
question.
good at asking questions in the House, and maybe he has to reply sometimes. So, if anybody has a question for David, please say so.
Just while you think about that, the one not so much question, but I encourage you. I was really encouraged to hear what you said about manufacturing, and there is a nonsense going on in Victoria and Australia that manufacturing is dead. And I kid you not, in schools, teachers are telling kids who are interested in manufacturing, do not get into manufacturing, it's dead. So guess what they want to do? They want to become lawyers, doctors, accountants, dentists. There's a huge oversupply of dentists, by the way. So government, I think, can play a big role, and what you're doing is excellent. I'm just interested in your view about that, about the number of manufacturers there are in Victoria, because my understanding is there's significant numbers.
I agree, and certainly there have been challenges for particularly our larger scale, say automotive manufacturing, and some of the reasons I've said that, but there is plenty of manufacturing continuing. There are new emerging industries, say Geelong is really looking at marketing itself as a carbon fibre centre. It's very proud of the carbon revolution, which is a wheel that's going on motor cars, and similar to this all the statistics we just heard. When you look at production costs, efficiency, strength, it really is a revolutionary material for construction, and really what aluminium did to steel, its expected carbon fibre, for example, could deal can do to aluminium in a sense. So that's an example where Geelong is a lead in the world, and there are plenty of others. 25,000 small manufacturers in Western Victoria, as I understand the numbers, and that includes also in food production, which is related to fibre, a lot of our direct sales agribusiness, which is a huge growing area, and another example where you now have the ability to return via the internet money to the farm gate, so there's lots of opportunities. I'm one who believes that Australia can do anything. Obviously, a country should focus on its competitive strengths, and I believe we are a unique island continent. We interact with every part of the world. We've got a history with every other country in the world in terms of our immigration patterns. We're a multicultural country, and therefore we should not seek to shut ourselves out of any markets. And yes, we can look at merging opportunities, but we really have great opportunities to interact with the rest of the world. But we also are a unique country in that environmentally, historically, we are in a sense isolated and physically protected. And that's why we have this unique fauna. We have a wonderful destination for people to live, and that's important for high quality manufacturing. People actually are immigrating to Victoria, and Geelong is a beautiful city, as is Melbourne, but I prefer Geelong. And it has a north-facing bay, and those actual lifestyle benefits that Australia offers, and Victoria offers, in terms of the future manufacturing with high skills, high science, working with agriculture and other input products, you actually have a destination for capital, a destination for people to come and contribute, and therefore I believe the future is very strong. But in this competitive world, we need to be making sure that we set our policies and industry responds with as much certainty but a clear vision for achieving that opportunity. So not dead, maybe suffered a few blows, but can bounce back very well.
Andrew.
Hi, I'm from the UK, and before coming here I thought I'd look and find out what was happening in the textile industry. And the thing that amazes me about Australia is the fact that you are wool growers and you've been well known as wool growers for many years, and yet you export your wool at such an early stage, a scoured wool, and not add the value onto it, which I just find unbelievable.
Comes back as $1,000 men's suit.
That, you're doing exactly what the Brits did to the Indians in taking raw cotton to Manchester to spin it, to then add all the value to it. So Australia's losing out on a massive valuable
I
part
agree.
of the chain. What's government going to do about that to promote the wool growers to do the right thing?
Well, I'll give you just a person. I agree. We actually have to do that. We have Greasy Wool, Tech Wolf is a company that still do some production, obviously carpets as well, coarse wools. But I have a very good personal example. I'm a wool grower who's been growing wool with various guys in our family since the 1840s and 50s. Thanks to our English friends who decided we were better off here than in Ireland. So they got us out here one way or the other, and we're very happy for that decision. So thank you for that. But one of my very good friends are Lutheran farmers who make fine wool, and Mr. Xenia from Xenia Suits comes out each year and buys the best crop off the sheep's back. They do a great operation. But I always pose to him in a joke, wouldn't it be great if we had just one, Australian suit manufacturer come and maybe get the second best clip and make maybe not a Xenia suit but something of it. And I've often said that and haven't got much of a response. But recently I was pleased that a cousin of mine, another O'Brien, Jackie O'Brien, is now a fashion designer out of Hamilton. And she led the Hamilton Sheepvention fashion show this year, and if you know about Sheepvention, it's Hamilton's big show for wool, and the fashions that are now coming out of our schools, like RMIT, like Gordon and Deakin in Geelong, and like Hamilton RMIT as other places, in fact can lead the world. So we've got opportunities in the high end, we've got opportunities at the coarse wool, and I think that's a great challenge. I don't think there's any reason why we can't do it. The historical reasons why we perhaps closed down some of our manufacturing here with the wool mills in Geelong is documented, and that's a sort of trend I would like to see us reverse.
excuse me, just a
Yes.
comment that's happened in New Zealand, you know, particularly with the wool carpets, is that there's been no promotion, you know, from the wool growers, and it's been very poor. And, you know, if you look at the people from nylon, Stainmaster nylon products, and they've got a huge marketing campaign, and they've sold the product, and they're killing the wool carpet in New Zealand now, you know, just because the farmers have not had a decent organisation to promote these products.
So the big hope again is information, like the points you make about the spinners not being aware of downstream consequences of some of that environmental regulation. Now, we wouldn't tolerate that on our manufacturers here.
Sure.
And I think we're right to have those high standards of externalities. We don't pollute our rivers, etc., like we perhaps did. And my question is, why aren't we expecting those standards on the rest of the world? And I think the market will increasingly do so, as you say. And I think Victoria's actually in a good position to capitalise on that.
Andrew, you want to make a comment?
No, sorry.
Anybody else, any questions to raise with
Graham Dickinson.
Hello. I just want to ask, given that there doesn't appear to be a will to do anything on the tariffs of imported textiles, and even though you mentioned about the tariffs on imports into China, what do you see as a proposal to try and level up the unlevel playground or unlevel situation with regard, particularly like, you know, that water costs for manufacturers about a third of the costs here, that's in and out costs, and also a lot of the other environmental costs are much lower than they are in Australia. What was the government's ideas to how the playing field can be levelled somewhat for Australian manufacturers?
Yeah, well, the government's views, both at the state and level, and this has been across both political parties, are, as you say, we are heading in 1 July to basically, I think, virtually get rid of the last remaining tariffs on many of our manufacturing. 96% of our tariffs will go. Now, personally, I have indicated that I don't, my personal view, and I'm a voice inside government, to the extent I'm here today, outside government and other forums, for believing that that strategy has perhaps swung the pendulum too far, and that we should not, I don't see a reason necessarily for us to be wildly ahead of our trading competitors, particularly when they aren't putting the environmental standards on their products, which effectively can come back and hurt our consumers. And in a global economy, we want to encourage that. So I don't believe the tariff debate is dead. I may be one of the few, and I'm not trying to be a loony in this game, but some would portray me as such by making such outrageous comments. I look at it as an equivalence issue, and you can either regulate or tax, in a sense, on the way in and the way out. And if we regulate ourselves, I simply ask, why aren't we either taxing or regulating others? And I suspect that argument can catch on. And I reckon really it's up for you as a forum, if that is something your industry is concerned about again, to re-engage with other politicians from all political perspectives to, first of all, you've got 1 January coming in 2015, you've got the FTA with China, a huge deal. When that deal's done, that'll be locked in for a period of time. Now is the time, if you're concerned about this sort of policy and where we're heading, to actually speak up as an industry.
What would be the chances for considering something like a levy, because the manufacturers here have to operate sustainably, but all the imports that come
Absolutely.
in are not sustainable, because Australia faces all the disposal costs for all the materials that are coming in.
I agree. And the irony is also, at the moment, where the federal government unashamedly is short on revenue, and there's an article in The Age, I don't know if it's validated, but it says we've lost about $1.2 billion in revenue, just in lost revenue from the latest changes as a result of the free trade agreements. So where would we be in revenue terms if we just had equivalence to any country that whacks a tariff on us? And it may only be until they go to a genuine free trade position. So, for example, Japan has gone to 0 in manufacturing. Well, that's great. We'll be at 0 there. That's fine with Japan. We've got a free trade agreement there. They're not the same with agriculture, but they are there with manufacturing. Now, to me, it's a matter of negotiation. As a lawyer, you want to go into a negotiation to get the best free trade agreement. Well, you want to start with the best to negotiate with. And I think I'm agreeing with you, sir, in saying that I don't see the logic for it anymore in this particular information age. Others Others will say, well, the consumer can drive all this. We should just let the consumer sort it out, and it's cheaper to the consumer and allows capital to go to the best thing. I think that's a naive argument when the rest of the world isn't playing that game.
Michael Director, Defence Technologies, and also TTNA. Recently, our experience has shown that we'd like to see the government take a more proactive approach in not necessarily labelling a net tariff, but even taking a more proactive approach, as the United States does, in any military textiles we purchase have to be manufactured in the States. As a matter of fact, there's a thing called Berry Amendment, which stops fully manufactured textiles coming into the United States for use by any government department. And even though it's not a tariff, the net effect of that is that it supports its local manufacturing to its own spend, which has a double role. Not only do you support people who are then earning a living, putting money into the economy, but you're also supporting industry and manufacturing on site. And if anything, we would like to see the Australian government probably take on a more, even the state governments take on a more proactive role, not so much in meddling the market or the end effect, which is the tariff, which can be shut down, in the world trade sector, but more internally in supporting jobs.
Well, yeah, and certainly by experience in other industries, particularly engineering, the Americans have a great defence to world trade discussions, which is, I'm sorry, sir, we'd love to take your product, but as a matter of national security, you understand we've got to let our own boys do this. Sort of language, and I'm being a bit unfair, but they actually have a very large core of Army and Navy engineers who do a lot of their work, at least as head contractors. And there are opportunities, again, under our free trade agreement to get in there, but it is much more protective than the reciprocal relationship, and I query that logic continuing, and we'll see. But thank you for that comment.
David, thank you very much for taking questions and adding further opinions. Now,
I've earned the bottle of wine now.
I'm going to present to you a bottle of wine.
Do you want me to write a thank you note?
No,
It's not Grange.
it's not Grange. It's, I'm sure that you and your family will enjoy it. Please accept it on our behalf. Thank you very much.
Well, I will never forget it.
So,
Morning tea is in this room. There's some cakes, fruit, platters. Help yourselves.
so we can get going. It's my great pleasure to introduce to you Adrian Clarke. Adrian is a hemp grower, cannabis sativus. Now don't get confused, folks. We always think the genus of real hemp is Cannabis sativus. But the nasty stuff, the marijuana, is Cannabis indica. So it's a different product.
Can I die with it? Can I die with the indigo? I smoke it.
Oh, you smoked it, yeah.
I thought you could die with it.
Many years ago, to get somebody to grow hemp in Victoria was a nightmare, because if you mentioned cannabis sativus, oh, marijuana, you can't do that, you can't do this. But eventually, Adrian managed to get commercial hemp growing. And it's a very great pleasure to have Adrian here to talk to us about what he's doing and what he wants to do in relation to the use of cannabis sativa, or hemp, as we all know. Adrian, thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, as Max said, it was quite difficult, but we got the Jeff Kennett government to recognise that hemp was not marijuana, and in 1998 it was legalised to grow. So, what is hemp? First, it is not marijuana, and that's probably been the biggest issue, is that even today, many politicians will say, oh, that's marijuana. Many people will argue with me about that. So, first of all, it's not marijuana. non-drug industrial hemp is a source of strong fibre. They debate whether hemp or flax is stronger. They can make cars out of both. It's a source of cellulose for paper and building, and it's a high protein food. Now that's the issue that's going on in politics in Australia today. We're the only country, we and New Zealand are the only countries in the world where you cannot eat hemp food. That's the wisdom of somebody, but it's the highest protein grown food. And right. Can't see what I'm doing.
Oh, you can see them.
So that's what marijuana is. Now this is very unique. This fibre is unretted hemp fibre, which we produce with our machine. It's totally unique. Now this fibre from that moment, which is just out of the back of our decortication machine, can be turned into a composite. You can make car bodies with it. You can make very strong composites with that because it's not retted, so it's not damaged by semi-rotting. Or you can put it through an extra process and turn it into a textile fibre, which we've got a process which turns it into a fibre which is like a cotton. It'll spin in standard cotton machinery. Now that again is unique. This is a typical head stem. Some of the Chinese varieties are not hollow, but most of the European ones are. The fibre is in the green on the outside. It's in that section. The hurd is that white material, and that's what you make buildings. You can make it into paper, you can turn it into a cellulosic. In fact, early rayons were made of that. So, almost nothing can be done with hemp until the hurd is taken out of the fibre. That's decortication. There are three main methods of taking the hurd from the fibre. There's a traditional, which is called the long line wet spinning method. There's the modern European, where they're rushing to get the hurd out for animal bedding and the fibre down to the car manufacturers to make wheat composite products. And then there's our way. We'll get to our way soon. Now, these are ideal fibre crops. You'll see a lot of short crops. They're mainly for seed, but these are the ideal fibre crops. You'll see how tall they are. That one was grown in Byron Bay, therefore it has a bag over the flowers at the top. That's because the marijuana growers nearby in Byron Bay said if we let any of our pollen from our hemp crop get into their marijuana crops, they would burn down our field. Because marijuana requires high THC, this has virtually no THC, and when you let the pollen from the hemp get into the marijuana, it completely destroys their THC count and ruins their crop. And since they were the mafia, we had to take them seriously. So, you can see how tall those crops are.
If it grows in 90 days, does that mean you get 4 crops a year?
It's a summer crop. It won't grow.
It won't grow, just 1 crop a year.
No, we've got 3, and in 1 year we've got 4 crops.
Okay.
But you do the last crops are a bit short. It's daylight sensitive, and when it senses the day is short, it will go to flower quickly. So we do the late crops to seed to plant the next time. So the first crop, the one we plant in August, will grow like this. The next crop hopefully will grow like this. The third crop we do in Victoria, we have to wait till the heat of the January and February is over, and we can plant one in late February or early March, and that'll be a seed crop. But we still get fibre out of it. We just don't get 3 tonnes, we might get 1.5. But we get 3 tonnes of fibre per hectare and 7 tonnes of hurd per hectare out of this crop. and it's a 90-day crop. Now, the first of the two methods of processing, other than ours, require retting. Now, retting is a Dutch word, which means rotting. They let the plant half rot so that the gums and pectins that hold the fibres together and the fibre to the herd are eaten. When they field ret, it's eaten by a fungus that comes out of the soil, but you've got to have a lot of dew. It's got to be, I mean, you can do this in Yorkshire in summer, but you can't do it in Australia. So, their fields, you can see how extensive they are. This one was in Hastings in Britain. This one, I think is America. I think these two are America. Obviously, I've got them out of the library, but that's field retting. Now, these are sheaves and stooks. The individual bits, you've got to learn this language. That's a sheave, and together it becomes a stook. And they dry it like that before they put it in water in the hot countries. And they leave it in water. Now, the field retting can take up to 3 months. Now, no Australian farmer would allow that to happen. They wouldn't let you take up a field while you're retting, and you have to turn it over every 3 days. The retting master of the field will say when it's ready or not. Now, when you do water retting, which is in the hotter countries like Italy, you have to leave it in warm water for about 3 weeks. So these are stacks of hemp that I saw in China. The bottleneck to processing all this hemp is the water retting. And there's a water retting tank. It's got a boiler room next to it, and they put it in, they weigh it down with stones and logs, and they leave it there for 3 weeks, while the bacteria eats the gums and the pectins so that it can be separated. Now, so water retting's done, like Italy has done. You can go through northern Italy and see these huge things. They look like swimming pools. They're still there. I was in Italy recently and they were there, and they were for retting. And this is the Chinese one. I've seen similar ones in Ireland. The process for doing hemp is the same as for flax, so it's just flax and bristol. Now, once it's retted and you've loosened the fibre, you can put it through a scutching machine. Scutching is a decortication machine. Now, these machines are huge. They take it in and they put it through turbos that beat the herd out of it. That lonely looking man there in Kentucky, he was using a field breaker, which was a series of corrugated shapes that he would put the hemp stem across and break it. It would break the herd on the inside, and then he'd shake it out and he'd put it there. So after they had field ret in this case, they then made stooks to dry it, and that stops the retting process, because if it goes too far, everything rots. You've got nothing. If you're field retting and you've got no rain, it doesn't ret. If you've got no dew, it doesn't ret. Now, I was in Britain during their heat wave, and nearly all of the fibre they grew that year they couldn't process, except through our system. If it rains too much, like it does in Wales, where you can grow dew, it rains all the time, it rots. So you can't field ret for either of those two reasons. And of course, neither of those places were hot enough for you to do water retting. So it goes through these scutching machines. That machine is about 70 yards long, metres for those younger than me. I've seen them in Ireland and in Italy, and they're extremely expensive machines to decorticate. Here's another picture of of it. You can see how long it is. And out the end comes fibre. But note all the amount of machinery. This is just to process hemp or flax. This huge amount of machinery that's worth millions and millions of dollars. And that's not the end of the process, that's just scutch. Then they go through hackling, which is a series of combs, from very coarse combs to very fine combs. And they high speed, in this case, comb the hemp hanks, or the flax hanks, that are put over a plank. And they go around and they do it, then they do it a second time. And by the time that's all finished, there's about 10% of the fibre that was in the field is left. But it's very long, beautiful fibre, 600 millimetres. Beautiful, soft hanks of fibre. And that's what they use for spinning. They put it through, well, there's a primitive hackle, gives you an idea of what it's actually doing. That's out of the Kentucky Museum. And there's another big hackler. The two main people that made hacklers were Mackie in Belfast and Lina Pianti in Italy, and I've been to both of their factories. In those days we were doing long line hemp. We had a machine to do that. So once it's gone through these things, it's then spun on these long line wet spinners, which are rather intriguing machines, but they require very hot water to soften the gums that are still left, and then it's spun, and then the yarn is bleached and dried. Then it's ready to go off to be made into linen, usually. Now, this is an overview of a modern European hemp plant. So what I've just gone through is the traditional hemp processing. This is a more modern way of doing it, where they're just wanting to rush the stuff through to get the herd for animal bedding and whatever. And the fibre is used for wheat composites. It cannot be used as textiles because it's been hammered. You can see the bales here, so it gives you an idea of how big this frame is. It goes through bale unrollers, openers, through the hammer mills, and they eventually separate their product. Now this is one that was in England at Hemcorp. It's now no longer there. Before the hemp arrives in bales, it's been retted. Now their method of retting is to first cut it into lengths about this long, ret it, turn it over for a few weeks. Then they chop it into what they call billets that are about this long, and they do some more retting. Then they bale it. In some places they store it hermetically sealed for a year, and then they pull it out and they put it through these mills. All to decorticate, separate the fibre from the herd on the inside. Now, a process line like this to decorticate 10 tonnes an hour, that's a hectare's worth, costs approximately 20 million euros. That's from the field right through, the baling through, the hammer milling through, their final baling of fibre. Almost everything in Europe is subsidised, from the planting to the retting to the building of these mills and then to the actual using of the mills. In Australia we found it impossible to field ret or to water ret, so we found a way to decorticate without retting at all, and no subsidies. This little machine here, it's about that big, does all the work that those great big machines do. That little machine does it all. And we can do it green, fresh hemp or dry hemp, but we don't need to ret it. So we call that the D8, because it's decorticator number 8 in our processes of developing this system. Every one of them has worked, but one of them, the first one we did, went on a drill and did one stem at a time. And so we've developed it now to a commercial size and a commercial strength. There it is, sitting up there as a static machine, so the operator can stand up there and we put a platform here and they just feed it in. You can see that on our website. The piece under here makes sure that the fibre goes one way, which is out this way, and drops into bags here, and the herd goes out that way through can be used for whatever. Now, there you see the fibre, and there you see me sitting very happily on a whole lot of herd. All unretted, never been done before, a world first. Now, we took that little machine, the D8 machine, and we put it on a harvester. Now, we did a few of these, different ways. We stuck it on the front of the combine, and that was all right. But this one, what we do is we cut it first, wire it down in the windrow, and then we bring this machine, which has a pickup on it, feeds it into the D8. The herd goes out the side there, and in this prototype, the fibre drops on the ground and it can be picked up by a baler. But our next version, we've just contracted major engineering company in Geelong to manufacture the commercial version of these machines. And there will be a conveyor underneath that picks up, collects the fibre and puts it in a bale on the trailer behind, so that it never touches the ground. So, this will do 10 tonnes an hour, because it will do a hectare an hour. Compare that to the 20 million euro machines. And it requires no retting. So, somebody like a Kevin McLeod who wants to build another hemp village in Britain can grow his crop near where he's going to build it, run this machine through, and he's got all his herd. For doing that, he can take the fibre and make that into window frames, doors, pultruded floorboards, all those sorts of things. Now, the look of the fibre depends on the growth stage. This is green, very green, wet hemp. You need to process that fairly quickly. That's dry, off a seed crop where they took the seed off and let the stems, and we did the stem. That's an even drier crop. That's in northern New South Wales. This is in New Zealand, and this is in Griffith, New South Wales. So this fibre from this moment can either go into a textile line or into a composite line. The composite line is simply opening it. There's some more. So the textiles, it needs to go into a degummer. Now there's some more herd. Now a lot of this herd has already gone into buildings. There's one in Northcote that's been done, and we've built some. We do some of it on our property up in Ballarat. But that is unretted herd. Now you can't make paper out of retted herd. You can make paper out of this. There's the wall. Now that wall breathes. So if you want a 5-star or 6-star rating, normally you've got to hermetically seal your house. If you have one of these walls, it will do the breathing for you, and you won't get mould. But you must, ipso facto, get mould in these 5- and 6-star rating houses. If it's a hemp house, you can't get mould. And this is also fire resistant. You can hold a blowtorch against that for an hour. It will not burn. So if you want to build a house in a fire-prone area, that's the material to do it. A UK brewery uses hempcrete to maintain a constant temperature in its brewery. Doesn't use, you'd know this one.
No, not the UK brewery.
Yeah, and the London Wine Society, they don't have a heating or cooling cost. It just stays 12 degrees. And Kevin McLeod did an estate, and the occupants claimed an 80% reduction in heating bills. Now we've got an associate in Ireland who goes into all those houses that were thrown up during the boom with no insulation, and he puts about 4 inches of hempcrete on the inside walls. It changes the whole character of the heap. When I was in Ireland, we did one with just plastering, and it changed the character of that house. So, here we are back at the fibre. We opened the fibre here. This is to be used for composites. We needle punched it and make very, very strong composites. Here are some things that we've made from it. Shipping pallet, 5 kilos for a shipping pallet, and they're stackable. This is some boards we made for an experimental caravan maker, and that is the Lotus Elise. When we were working in Yorkshire, I sent them some fibre. They came out to our farm and they took all that we had and they made the Elise with it. Now, when we degum it, we have a simple process using dye works. So all of you will be familiar with that. High pressure, high temperature, and our cocktail of chemicals. And we stick it in there for about 2 to 3 hours, and when we pull it out, we have to rinse it, and we have a technique for that, and then we dry it, and then we put it through an opener. In this case, this is the IFC opener at Geelong, a little Fianor, and then we put it through a card. And from there, it's ready to spin. And that's Professor Zhonggai Wong spinning 100% hemp on a ring spinner at the IFC. And this fibre was spun here in this building, in this facility. And that's the fibre there. It looks and feels like cotton. Now, we took some up to Rockley's mill at Moe. We were going to take it up to their Bendigo mill, but it burned down the night that we were going. So we went to their Moe mill and we put it in their open eared spinners. And that's the hemp there, that's cotton just preceding it. That's the hemp, and when the hemp came through, it wed beautifully. And made a beautiful sliver. And in this case, Rama Murphy, the spinner, decided that he had some wool. And he said, let's make a blend. And he poked the 2 tops in, the hemp top and the wool top. And he made a blend. It was a beautiful blend, and there's some cloth made from it. You can see all of the patterning and everything that's quite possible to make. A lot of people told us, you can't spin it, so we spun it. Then they said you can't weave it, so we wove it. Then they said you can't knit it, so we knitted it. And we knitted it at a place, Warrigal, at Glengarry Knitters in Warrigal, just before they closed down. And the guy said, nobody will ever be able to question what you can do with this fibre with the knit that he made. And that's the knit. Very complicated. He made 2 jackets for us. I'll go back here. This is to recap. This is retted long line fibre, done the traditional long line way. Now, that's taken possibly 6 months, maybe a year, to be able to be spun. They've lost 90% of their spinnable fibre because they make a distinction between the short fat fibre that's in the internodes on the stem, which is called tow. Here comes plumber's tow and corking fibre and so on, and the long line. Our method makes no distinction. It just removes the gums between all the bundles of the fibre, and it breaks it down into this cotton-like state. And so that's been spun on cotton machinery. That's been spun on one of these huge long line wet spinners that if you were to buy one today, it'd be $40 million. So that's the difference. So we did that in 4 hours. Cut it in the field, degummed it and spun it on cotton machinery. And the most we lost, the most fibre we lost in any of our experiments was 10%. So it's a bit of a no-brainer really. So there we are. There's some fibre. That's the skin. That's an American cent to give you an idea of how fine that is. So hemp requires no toxic chemicals to grow, no toxic chemicals to process. It uses about the same water as a wheat crop to grow. It is ideal for organic and biodynamic agriculture because it doesn't have any of those nasty things, unlike cotton. Monsanto makes approximately $1,000 out of every hectare of cotton grown because of the chemicals they have to put on to grow cotton. According to an English study that I saw, it takes 20 tonnes of water to grow 1 kilogram of cotton fibre. I haven't, that was Cranfield University study. So, our technology slashes the cost of processing. We can actually come in cheaper than cotton, but we don't like to say that too loud. And it starts its work on the farm. So there is no central processing unit required. So regional industries can develop for composites or for textiles. The problem right now that we face in Australia is there are no cotton spinning mills, but we can spin it on some wool systems. So at the moment we've been offered spinning in New Zealand and spinning in Indonesia. The Indonesians only want organic fibre, which we're growing. New Zealand is happy with it. But we are agitating to have the spinner returned to Australia. Either Geelong or Maryborough would suit us very well. So, with TCI technology, Australia can lead the world in the hemp industry. We can do it all here. We can export fibre to China. We can export fibre to anywhere. We're currently negotiating with IKEA, who want our fibre. They want 200,000 tonnes a year in the year 2025, and they want us to build up to that. So, because our fibre is better for their textiles and it's better for their composite use. So we can either grow it here or we can build machines and grow it in Europe during their summer, and then during our summer we can grow it here, and it can be a year-round supply. And that's just one customer. The Chinese are now asking us for fibre because they've got problems growing it there. Their government's taking away a lot of their hemp growing regions and using them for food security. So they're saying, please grow it in Australia and send it to us. I'm saying, give me the import licence from China and we'll do so. So as you've seen, our system dramatically cuts the time and costs of producing hemp fibre, and we produce a remarkably better fibre. This is a quantum leap for the textiles and composites industries. Now, whoever's buying our fibre, their customers can buy the greenest product. This can be biodynamically and organically produced, and it can be produced in Victoria and Tasmania and Queensland and New South Wales. When we started, we couldn't grow it in Queensland. We had to develop varieties that would grow near the equator. That's been done. We can now grow 4 or 5 metre tall crops in Queensland and New South Wales, which we couldn't do when we started. So it can be locally grown, near the mills, near wherever it's going to be used. Cotton is at peak production. This is something people don't realise. All the land with the water and the climate that can grow cotton is basically taken up. It's around 20 million tonnes a year, and that's it. There isn't any more, so it leaves a demand gap. You can see here kind of thing. That's the gap between cotton production and the supply of a grown cellulose product. That gap this year is worth about $5 billion. That's a market that we in Australia could fill. So, the marketplace, I'm being told, is acutely aware of pollution in food and clothing. We've discussed that already, and that's subject of discussion later. And they feel safe buying locally. Now, we don't have the local spinner that will enable this to be all onshore, but I'm sure we can get one. The marketplace wants to have better products. They want locally made products, and they want it clean. And with hemp produced by our system, they can have it all. Imagine being the supplier of these products. What does that mean to your business? How will it position you in the ethical product marketplace? And isn't that the biggest growing market sector today? We're dealing with, we sent some fibre samples to Quintet in Sweden. They did some tests and said, because there's hemp in it, it's 30% more durable, 30% stronger. So they're waiting for us, and I've been talking to Bruck about this, to provide a blend. They want rayon, or it could be tencel, and hemp blend for their gear in Sweden. But we don't have a spinner, so I can't start. I have to take it offshore to do that. So, we are now in the position, we're ready for business, we've got engineers ready to make our machines for us. We're prepared to talk about exclusive rights for the fibre. So we've got to imagine what that will do for your business in textiles and what it will do for your business in composites. Just before Toyota closed down, we were negotiating with them to produce car body parts, which is possible without hemp, but not possible with the hemp out of the big European ones. So, got to think about that. Now, Charles and I are ready to talk about any sorts of deals or anything you want to propose for anybody. So we're in that position now. Okay? Thank you very much.
I'm sure somebody must have a question.
When you put it through the carding machine,
Can you speak up, please?
sorry, talking about putting that hemp through the carding machine, cotton has a reputation for being quite flammable. How would the hemp work under those sorts of conditions?
We've never had a problem. We've never, ever had a problem with that.
Tracy?
If the herd is inheriting, has FR properties, what about when it's in a textile? Does it?
Well, the herd doesn't, well, you can make it into a cellulose. In fact, the early rayons were made from hemp. All the old movie film stock was made from hemp herd.
My question is,
So it used to catch fire. So
is it fire resistant in a composite?
yeah,
When you take it into a textile, does it have any properties of fire resistance? Or
the fibre does, but I can't talk about the herd. The herd, I know from history it's been used as a cellulosic. I've sent it to some people in Europe who've made it into a cellulosic and into a plastic, and they're very happy with it. But I didn't get a report back as to its fire resistance. But I know that when the herd is in its natural state mixed with binders, it is very fire resistant.
One question. You mentioned that 30% stronger. 30% stronger from what?
From their normal cotton product. Their normal cotton or cotton and rayon blended product. So they evaluated ours and said this will last 30% longer in clothing, and it is 30% stronger from whatever tests they did. They didn't tell us what the tests were. They just wrote back that saying, give us a lot of this fibre. Give us a lot of this textile. So I have a Swedish agent that's dealing with all the detail of that, but I get the reports.
Any differences in colouring to colouring cotton dyes?
No.
Right.
We did that here. We proved that here back in 1999. It's exactly the same when done our way. When you do it with field retting or water retting, it's different. Particularly field retting, which picks up a lot of minerals. And often when you buy an old field retted clothing, when you wash it a few times, it gets softer and beautiful, but you get speckling because the minerals have taken the dye and washed away. But you don't get that with ours.
Okay.
Mark?
I was just going to continue on that question. Dyeing the hemp, would it be very similar to dyeing the flax linen as compared to cotton?
Sorry,
The dye coloration of the clothing.
the coloration when done our way is exactly the same as the cotton.
So
But when you do it the traditional way, you get mineralisation in it. And that causes the problem with the dyes.
So is it similar to flax linen in the approach?
Flax is done exactly the same way as the traditional long line that I showed you.
Yeah.
We can do flax our way. We've done so. We've done flax, rainy, canaf. We put them all through our machine. Even jute. We made a very good yarn out of jute when done our way. Because it doesn't touch the ground, it doesn't get any dirt, it doesn't get any minerals, and it's just nice and clean. Not all of them are white though. Canaf is not white, it's a golden colour. Yeah.
Have you had any interest from existing cotton farmers at the moment to trial this to replace their existing cotton?
My relationship with cotton farmers has been very checkered over the years. They thought I was the enemy and they wanted to cut my throat. Now they realise that they're in big production and most of the clothing that you will buy is made in China and it is a blend of cotton and hemp. And in fact, hemp can be cotton's friend. Now the way we process it so that it's the same. Just blend it. Very easy to blend.
One other quick question too. Is there any IP issue involved with this crop? Like, is there any restriction?
In I think South Australia and Northern Territory are the only places you can't grow it. South Australia has legalised marijuana for personal use, and people would not like us to grow hemp there.
But IP issues, intellectual property issues.
Intellectual property issues. Well, it's our technology, and we're prepared to talk to anybody about how best to use it.
Without giving away all your secrets, which you know.
I'm sorry,
Without giving away
too many
all secrets,
noisy machines.
what does the TCI stand for in machinery, and essentially, what is it doing to
Decorticate,
Yeah.
what's our machine do?
Yeah.
Well, it decorticates. You stick the stems in one end and out comes fibre and fur.
What
So-
happens in the middle there?
Very good answer.
That's our IP issue.
And what does the TCI stand for?
Textile and Composite Industies.
Yes.
I'm just wondering, I'm not sure whether I missed it, but the degunning process.
Yep.
You said, is it enzyme based or there's chemicals?
We did have an enzyme-based one, which took about 4 days. But our investor at the time wanted a more industrial one, so we went to the IFC and we worked with them to develop this more industrial method that takes a few hours.
It's chemical based.
It's chemical based, yes.
But it's
Dilute chemicals.
organic in a way? Like is it?
We had it approved by the organic organisations when we first did it, and they said they see no reason to change that.
And just on that, have you had any, I'm sure, do you know about the Krayla fibre?
I know about
Yeah.
Krayla, yes.
And is that a similar process?
No, Krayla melts the whole stem down and turns it into a cellulose. An associate of ours in America took them to court because they were claiming it was hemp. In fact, it's a rape, and they're not allowed to claim
They're
it's
not
hemp.
claiming to be the most sustainable fibre when I found, yeah.
Well, it's It's got none of the qualities of hemp. It doesn't have the antibacterial quality, it doesn't have the UV blocking quality, it doesn't have any of those things. It's just a rayon. Because it melted down the cellulose and extruded.
There are no more questions. There is one more. Please.
Alright, you mentioned antibacterial. How does it compare to the silver-based or antibacterial fabrics that are in the market? Does it equal, better, worse?
I haven't seen, some of the Deakin University is doing a study on that, but I haven't seen the result of that study. We gave them a lot of material to do up at Griffiths for that, and I haven't seen the result, but the sort of the history of it is on medieval literature, and they'll talk about he was infected, but when I wrapped him in the hemp bandage, the infection went away and he killed. Now I read them, so I know.
So it would seem that it would be a good fabric to enter into the hospital room for that.
Exactly. We were negotiating with the Chinese hospital group for exactly that reason. So apparently a 10% blend, 10% of hemp or more will transfer that quality. The Chinese.
Any more questions? One more.
So just further to the antibacterial, how is it that it is antibacterial? Does it reduce the food source for the dust mites?
It just, fungus and germs and viruses cannot live on the hemp cloth. They just can't survive.
All right, if there are no more questions.
Can I just say one thing, Mac, that just blew me away with this hemp cloth? Adrian said this quality of antibacterial. So I wore, don't go, Adrian said, you tested. I wore a t-shirt in summer for 8 days. Didn't wash it. And there was 0 BO after 8 days. It's just remarkable.
Yeah.
And I go, well, how does this happen? I don't know how it happens, but you just do your own testing. You can buy hemp clothing. That's a blend, 45 hemp. Just test it, but just remarkable stuff.
Chinese army are all wearing socks for that reason.
Last one, Lucy.
I just wanted to say that was really fascinating and well done, and it's incredible to hear these stories. I was just wondering, you know how it seemed to be a really big marketing machine behind bamboo as a fibre? Is there any chance, like how can some big marketing machine get behind hemp so...
That's a very good question. That's the question I'm asking. My director of marketing is asking that question too.
How can we make people want to wear it and love it and grow it? And
people want it. People want it very badly.
Yeah.
We need a spinner in Australia, and we can do it here. Otherwise, I've got to send it to New Zealand or Indonesia. Then I can bring it back. Bruck are waiting for it, desperate for the yarn. They'll weave it.
So when you say people want it, though, that's people in industry, not necessarily
consumers. The marketplace is wanting it.
And there's one other drama with this technology. The users, the textile producers, don't want to do hemp if there's insufficient quantity. Globally, there's insufficient quantity. So then we've been busy talking to farmers, grow hemp. Adrian hasn't even touched on the environmental qualities for the farmer and the profits for the farmer. So we're talking to farmers, grow the hemp. The farmers go, we'll grow it if we can sell it. Then we go back to the market and say, do you want to buy this? And so the whole supply chain, a bit like you, Jeff, you know, we're driving the puller through so we can go back to the farmers, Australian farmers, and say, grow this stuff and then process it. That's the game.
I grew up sort of northwest of Bendigo. My parents are still there farming. Should I suggest?
Yes.
Yes. Is there enough rainfall?
You need irrigation or very good rainfall, that's all.
Yeah, that might be a problem.
All right. Adrian, thank you very much for struggling with the Victorian Railways and coming down from Ballarat on the train tonight. Nice to see you again. Many thanks, and please take this home and enjoy.
Well done.
This is Andrew Filarowski. He's our